the unsolved mystery of the Blackwood family massacre. The man known as Thorne, a name now synonymous with a quiet kind of failure, did not expect the package. It arrived without fanfare, a plain brown envelope, thicker than standard, heavy with the weight of paper and history. Its edges, when his fingers traced them, were yellowed and brittle, like parchment left too long in a forgotten attic. This was not a current case, nor a casual correspondence. This was a scar tissue, long healed and all but forgotten, beginning to throb anew. A physical manifestation of the ghosts he thought he'd buried years ago, sent unbidden to his solitary doorstep. He placed it on the chipped wood of his kitchen table, the only surface not cluttered with half-finished crossword puzzles or stale coffee rings. For a long moment, he simply stared, the internal battle a palpable hum in the silent room. The comfort of oblivion beckoned, a soft blanket of resignation he had painstakingly woven for himself. But beneath it, the gnawing pull of unfinished business, a restless current that had never truly stilled, tugged. A sigh, heavy with years of regret, escaped him. This was fate, perhaps, or simply a deferred reckoning. His fingers, slightly arthritic, worked at the seal. The paper gave way with a faint, dry crackle. As the flap lifted, a scent, distinct and unsettling, wafted up, the acrid tang of aged paper, dust motes disturbed from years of slumber, and something else, something sharper and metallic that lingered in the memory of old blood. It was the smell of dread. He pulled out the contents. A file thick and official, its bold black lettering proclaiming, Blackwood Family Massacre Case Cold. The date beneath it, etched into his mind like a recurring nightmare, brought it all back. October 27th. The crisp autumn air of that year had been shattered by the unimaginable discovery at the Blackwood estate, a property so grand, so steeped in old money and impenetrable stone, it had seemed immune to the vulgarity of the modern world. The file contained photographs, glossy despite their age, showing the sprawling edifice of Blackwood Manor, a symbol of opulence turned tomb. Its formidable gates, once a barrier against the mundane, had been rendered meaningless. The victims. Thorne's gaze fell upon their faces, frozen in time on police mugshots. Arthur Blackwood, patriarch, a titan of industry, Eleanor, his elegant wife, and their two teenage children, Julian and Clara, their youthful smiles now posthumous. 4 lives, extinguished with a brutality that shocked even seasoned investigators. The images, stark and unsparing, documented the impossible truth. The prominent family, found savagely murdered within their seemingly impenetrable home. He remembered the immediate shock that had gripped the community, the nation. The frenzied news reports, the initial pronouncements of a baffled police force. What truly perplexed, what burrowed into the minds of every officer on scene, was the absolute lack of forced entry. No shattered windows, no breached doors, no signs of struggle beyond the gruesome tableau within. It was as if the killer had simply walked in, and then walked out. His eyes scanned a faded crime scene photograph of the main hall. Amidst the professional chaos of forensic markers and measuring tapes, he spotted it again, the detail that had always nagged, an impossible shadow pooling beneath an antique console table, far too dark, too deep for the ambient light of the flash. A missing piece that never fit. He felt the familiar chill creep up his spine. The Blackwood case, a perfectly executed, perfectly baffling crime, was open again. And he, it seemed, was being drawn back into its cold, silent maw. The old map, painstakingly pieced together from forgotten municipal archives and a single, cryptic entry in one of Bartholomew Blackwood's personal journals, had led him here. From the manicured lawns of the Blackwood estate, a meticulously maintained barrier against the world, the journey had been a descent into something far older, far more untamed. Detective Miles Corbin, his trench coat a stark, incongruous dark against the dappled green and brown, stood at the precipice where civilization ended, and the Blackwood forest began its silent, brooding dominance. The air shifted, heavy and cold, even under the anemic autumn sun. It was not merely the dampness of the ancient earth, but something else, a palpable density that seemed to press in from all sides. The initial tree line was a skeletal, gnarled mass, an interlocking canopy that swallowed light whole. Each branch, devoid of leaves, reached like a grasping hand, a silent, static chorus against an unseen wind. The forest exhaled an odor of wet decay, of forgotten seasons piled upon centuries, a scent both earthy and subtly metallic, like old blood mixed with rain. He pushed past the initial curtain of low-hanging, thorn-riddled branches, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot a jarring invasion of the profound silence. The ground here was a vast, decaying tapestry, woven from generations of fallen timber and the slow, relentless creep of moss and fungi. The roots, exposed and gnarled, snaked across the path like arthritic veins, each one a testament to an unimaginable age, a connection to a deeper, darker past that seemed to hum beneath the surface. It was less a forest and more a living archive of decomposition, each shadow a memory, each whisper of air a fragment of a forgotten narrative. Corbin moved with a practiced, almost clinical stealth, his gaze sweeping across the visual cacophony. His senses were on high alert, the investigative instinct that had once been his sharpest tool, now a cold, honed edge. But here, the familiar parameters of a crime scene dissolved. There were no chalk outlines, no forensic markers, only the raw, untamed presence of the wild. Yet the distinct sensation of unseen eyes tracking his every move was undeniable, a prickle on the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. This was the sensation of being observed not by a person, but by the forest itself, an ancient, indifferent entity. Deeper still, where the light bled into an eternal twilight, the path gave way to a sudden, unnatural clearing. The trees here stood back, forming a rough, jagged circle, their branches reaching inwards, as if in silent veneration of the void at their center. And there it was, an impossibly old, moss-covered stone altar. It rose from the forest floor with a brutal, primitive grace, its surface scarred by time and something more deliberate. Strewn across its rough-hewn top were petrified offerings, fragments of bone, dark, dried flora, and what appeared to be small, calcified human effigies, meticulously arranged. Enigmatic symbols, deeply carved into the stone, glowed with a faint, malevolent energy that seemed to absorb what little light penetrated the canopy. They were unlike any script he had ever encountered, primal and disturbing, pulsing with a silent, resonant power that felt as old as the earth beneath his feet. This was no forgotten shrine. It was a testament to persistent, unbroken darkness. Corbin felt the breath catch in his throat, a cold, sharp intake that had nothing to do with exertion. The Blackwood case, the mansion's meticulous, baffling emptiness, now seemed connected to this. The precision of the family's demise, the impossible absence of evidence, the shadow that wouldn't fit, it all began to coalesce into a chilling realization. This was not merely a crime scene in the conventional sense, a place where a singular act of violence had occurred. This was a stage for something primal and deeply unholy, echoing across centuries, perhaps even millennia. The air thickened around him, charged with the palpable weight of ancient ritual. He had stepped onto unholy ground, and the Blackwood forest, with its myriad unseen eyes, had been waiting. The air around him, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, seemed to press in, a physical manifestation of the ancient presence he now keenly felt. He had stepped onto unholy ground, and the Blackwood forest, with its myriad unseen eyes, had been waiting. The realization was a cold, precise blade, severing the last vestiges of conventional police procedure from his mind. What he needed now were not forensics reports, but history. Not witnesses, but forgotten lore. The days that followed blurred into a meticulous excavation of the past. He sought refuge in the musty silence of the regional archives, a place where time itself seemed to have settled into dust motes dancing in the faint light. He trawled through local histories, land deeds, and obscure community records, his fingers growing raw from the relentless turning of brittle pages. His disgraced status meant he worked in isolation, his inquiries discreet, almost furtive. He was no longer pursuing a killer in the conventional sense, but rather a shadow that had, for generations, refused to dissipate. It began with fragmented whispers. Mentions in century-old town council minutes of peculiar observances in the Blackwood lands. Scrawled annotations in a forgotten local naturalist's journal hinting at unnatural rites performed beneath the oldest oaks. Slowly, painstakingly, the disparate threads began to weave a chilling tapestry. The symbols he had glimpsed, etched subtly into tree bark, implied in the very arrangement of certain stones on the Blackwood estate, began to find their counterparts in crude woodcuts and veiled descriptions within the archives. Then, from the faded script of a deranged preacher's unpublished manifesto, the name emerged, stark and disquieting: the cult of the Obsidian Veil. The text spoke of an ancient, secretive order, driven by a primal reverence for the forest's darkest aspects, believed to draw power from acts of profound sacrifice. Their practices, outlined in veiled but unmistakable terms, involved rituals performed under specific celestial alignments, the offering of purified vessels, a chilling euphemism for human life, to an unnamed entity dwelling within the earth. History recorded a period of public hysteria in the late 18th century, followed by a swift, brutal suppression, leading authorities to declare the cult eradicated, its adherents scattered, its vile practices consigned to the dustbin of barbarous superstition. Yet here it was, showing new, sinister shoots through the cracks of civilization. Like a noxious weed, thought to be pulled from the earth, now flourishing once more, threatening to choke everything in its path. The precise brutality of the Blackwood murders, the eerie stillness of the crime scene, the unnerving absence of conventional evidence, it all resonated with the cult's documented methodology, an emphasis on absolute control, ritualistic cleanliness, and leaving no trace beyond the profound terror of the act itself. The confirmation of the cult's continued existence arrived not through further archival discovery, but with a chilling, personal inflection. A single, unmarked envelope appeared in his dilapidated mailbox, devoid of a return address, its heavy paper redolent of something vaguely earthy, like disturbed soil. Inside, a single sheet, a perfectly rendered drawing of the Blackwood family crest, overlaid with the unmistakable symbol of the Obsidian Veil. Below it, in a hand both elegant and unsettlingly precise, a single line: "Some shadows merely wait for the sun to set again. The forest has eyes, detective, and it watches you." The veiled threat, delivered through an anonymous, unsettling message, confirmed their chilling awareness of his investigation. The grim historical accounts of their past sacrifices now sent shivers down the spine, painting a picture of unimaginable depravity that was not merely historical, but actively re-emerging. Fueled by this direct challenge, The detective pressed on, cross-referencing names found in old censuses with land ownership records, marriage certificates, and local business ledgers. He sought any thread connecting the historical cult to the modern community. The task was monumental, an exercise in connecting phantoms across centuries. But then, as he painstakingly constructed fragmented genealogies, a pattern began to emerge. Certain surnames, recurring through generations, clustered around the Blackwood lands, names associated with founding families, with local institutions, with seemingly innocuous lives. He sat late one night, the dim lamp illuminating a rapidly expanding web of connections on his table. A list of potential descendants or current adherents began to take shape. The names were unnervingly familiar. The mayor's family, the head of the local historical society, a respected barrister, even the kindly old woman who ran the only bakery in town. The darkness, he realized with a profound internal chill, was not confined to the ancient, malevolent forest. Its pervasive reach had seeped into the very fabric of the community, silently weaving its threads into everyday lives, a silent watch over a populace blissfully unaware of the predator in their midst. The Blackwood family had merely been the most recent, most prominent sacrifice in a game played across centuries, by the silent watchers whose names were now staring back at him from the list. The names on the list were not merely cult members, they were pillars. Judges, councilmen, a high-ranking officer within the very precinct tasked with the Blackwood investigation, even a prominent figure in regional banking, whose philanthropic efforts were widely lauded. The realization hit with the force of a physical blow. The tendrils of the silent watchers were not merely pervasive. They were woven into the very fabric of the establishment, rendering the entire system a complicit facade. The Blackwood family hadn't been an isolated tragedy, but a calculated offering, shielded by an impenetrable network of influence and fear. This wasn't a case to be solved through conventional means. Every official channel he might typically use for verification, every potential ally within the system, was now suspect. The air in his makeshift office, once thick with stale coffee and the scent of old paper, now carried the metallic tang of betrayal. He felt a creeping dread, a slow-acting poison seeping into his own sphere. A message, encrypted and anonymous, appeared on his secure burner phone. A single image, a faded newspaper clipping from 2 decades prior. His face, younger, haunted next to the headline, Detective Anderson disgraced after botched kidnapping case. Below it, a scrawled addition, some secrets refuse to stay buried. Yours are no different. His past, a carefully sealed tomb, had been unearthed. The botched case, the one that had cost him his badge and nearly his sanity, a young girl never found, her parents forever broken. It wasn't just a threat, it was a psychological weapon crafted with chilling precision. They knew his weaknesses. They knew his pain. And they were using it to isolate him, to remind him of his failures. The web was tightening. He tried to contact an old, trusted contact in internal affairs, a man named Miller who had always valued truth above institutional loyalty. The line rang unanswered, then went straight to voicemail, a recording he knew to be a placeholder for a deactivated number. A dead end instantly. He tried another, a journalist he'd fed scraps to in the past, hoping for an external voice to amplify the rising alarm. Her editor, a man he'd never spoken to, curtly informed him she was on an indefinite leave of absence. The silence that followed felt deliberate, engineered. Each attempt to connect, each tentative step outside his isolated bubble, felt like a thread vibrating with unseen activity. He moved through the city streets with a heightened sense of awareness, the casual glance of a passerby, the parked car with tinted windows, all now potential nodes in the cult's surveillance. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey, caught in a delicate, impossible snare. The metaphor of the spider's web wasn't just figurative. It felt physically present, each movement tightening the invisible filaments around him. The call came from an unknown number. A voice, modulated and distorted, spoke. "Detective Anderson, we know you're tenacious. We respect that. But you misunderstand. This isn't a game of discovery. It's a game of preservation." A sharp, sickening realization washed over him as the voice continued, a chillingly familiar cadence beneath the distortion. It was Miller. Not the true Miller, but a mimicry. The real Miller had been compromised, or worse, consumed. The betrayer wasn't an unknown face, but a twisted echo of a trusted one. "The girl, Anderson," the voice hissed, "the one you never found. She wasn't an anomaly. She was the first of our gifts. The Blackwoods, they were merely more substantial. The forest hungers. And we provide." The truth of the missing victims, whispered from the mouth of a ghost, solidified into a horrifying, unspeakable clarity. Ritualistic sacrifice, not just for power or wealth, but for something far more ancient and depraved. The cult wasn't just controlling, it was feeding. The dark heart of the forest, once a backdrop, now pulsed with a malevolent life, sustained by the very people sworn to protect the city. Anderson was no longer just investigating a murder. He was staring into an abyss, an organized, systemic horror operating in plain sight. He was truly alone. No allies, no recourse. His past failures, his present isolation, the fate of the missing, it all converged into a single, terrifying point. Time had run out. The options, once numerous, had dwindled to a singular, desperate path. To fight the shadows, he had to confront the light that cast them, the public faces of the silent watchers. He looked again at the list. The name at the top, Alastair Thorne, the benevolent banker, chairman of several city boards, host of annual charity galas. Thorne was the nexus, the public face of the hidden horror. It was a trap, he knew. Every fiber of his investigative instinct screamed caution. But caution was a luxury he could no longer afford. He couldn't expose a conspiracy so deeply entrenched by building a slow case. It would be swallowed whole. He needed to strike, hard and fast, before he himself disappeared into the web. There was only one way to truly understand the depth of their depravity, to find proof, or to simply make enough noise that the system itself cracked open. Anderson picked up his worn leather jacket, the weight of his sidearm a cold comfort. He was going to pay Thorne a visit. Tonight.